I guess we'll give everybody a few more minutes here. I'll give everybody a couple minutes, but welcome. We're all just getting settled now. In the meantime, I will introduce myself. My name is Nika Faulkner. I am the DAG Fellow. And this is our second of the DAG Spotlight series. So I'll just get right into it here. Yes, this is the second ever Spotlight series. We have Kieran Timberlake, who will be presenting on their very exciting project at 2300 Market Street. We also coming up have a few other events at DAG. On February 11th, we have a one-on-one with Jesse Lawrence that will be in person at 5:30, from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Center for Design Philadelphia, and that's at 1218 Arch Street, if you haven't been. And then following that up on Thursday, February 27th, we have a book talk with Molly Lesser on her new publication, Building Ghosts, Past Lives and Lost Places in a Changing City. So that'll be a pretty exciting one. We'll have some pretty interesting images from her as well. And then in March, we have our next DAG Spotlight series. So this is going to be called Partnering to Protect Our Commercial Districts, Flood Mitigation and Preparedness and Resilience in Manayunk and East Falls. So they'll be presenting on how these different community groups came together in the East Falls and Manayunk areas after Hurricane Ida, which really impacted those neighborhoods. So it should be pretty interesting to see how everybody collaborated to come up with a plan for the future. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. I'll speak a little louder. I got a note that I was breaking up here, but and so I guess we'll just move right on to today. So with us, we have John McCandlish. He's a principal at Kieran Timberlake. And we have Ryan Wall, who I believe was project architect at 2300 Market. So I'll let you guys take it away. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Nika. It's really great to be here with you all this morning. I hope everyone has their coffee. Thank you so much to the DAG board for inviting us to present 2300 Market, a project Ryan and I have been working on since 2020, 2021, and which is nearing completion in the next couple of months. Yeah, I'd like to start just by setting the stage a little bit, describing a little bit of the framework with which we approached this project as architects, and that is that all urban architecture is civic architecture and carries with it a certain civic responsibility. What I mean by that is the work we do impacts the lives of those who live and work and visit the places that knit together the urban fabric. And so it's our responsibility as designers and architects not just to leave the context better than we found it, but to do so without erasing its unique sense of history and place. And so that's really the framework that we've approached this project with our client Breakthrough Properties and with the project's construction manager, Hunter Roberts Construction Group. And you can see here a photo that Ryan took just a couple of weeks ago of the project nearing completion, looking towards March, and then landscape starting to fill in April. And this is a 242,000 gross square foot, 225,000 square foot life sciences research facility developed by Breakthrough Properties. Our role as core and shell architect was really to develop the project, enable the project, build the project for core and shell, and for eventual tenant fit out.
Great. Hi, everyone. Just a little more on John and myself. I'm Ryan Wall. I'm an associate here at KT. John's a principal. We've both been at the firm for over 10 years and have worked on lots of projects, obviously, but we're super thrilled to have been able to work on this really important kind of aspirational project in our own backyard. And obviously, we're excited to talk to you all about it. And of course, we were, small part of a larger team here in our office. are happy to share the project with you today. So we're going to do that through these 4 kind of essential themes. Talk through the overall site and the constraints that led into the development of the massing in the project, the importance of place for all of our projects, but this project in particular. Then getting into a little more detail on the overall system of the building and tectonics themselves, and then diving deeper on the renewal aspects of the project, in particular, the building at the corner and the reconstruction of the terracotta facade at the middle building. And like I mentioned, we're part of a larger team in our office, but also a really expansive and collaborative team across our ownership group, the construction team led by Hunter Roberts, and then our incredible design team, many firms of which are based here in Philly. And I think Allison from OJB might be on this call, who's been a great collaborator on this project as well for the landscape and streetscape.
So just to get started, before we start to dive into those 4 themes that Ryan mentioned, I'm going to set the stage a little bit for really, I think, what amounts to the commercial potential for this project. I mean, this is a project that is intended to revitalize commercially this stretch of Market Street at 23rd to 24th Street. And, when we were approached by our client Breakthrough Properties, they were really eager to, I think, tap into not just the burgeoning life sciences hub of West Philadelphia and University City, but also to really leverage the dynamic historic core of Center City. And this site represented just an incredible opportunity at this inflection point between Center City and University City, of course, proximate to 30th Street Station, Schuylkill River Trail, and the Schuylkill River, with incredible opportunities for connection to the city. When we began work on the project, this was the site, as these trio of buildings aged a little over 100 years from the early part of the 20th century. 2300 Market, the brick building at the corner, 2314 Market, the taller building in the middle with the very elegant, handsome terracotta facade, and then a smaller building at the third, which was unfortunately condemned, for demolition. An unsafe building. It had actually started to peel away from the middle building. But when we approached the site and we approached these buildings, we really felt that this was a unique opportunity to retain what is a historic element to this part of the streetscape that has essentially been, over the course of 100 years, removed and replaced with larger scale buildings. The Pico building across the street, and of course, 2222 Market, which replaced a surface parking lot across 23rd Street. So this was a very neglected stretch of Market Street, I think, to put it mildly. These buildings were empty. The last tenant of 2300 Market had been the Culinary Institute, the School of the Arts, or Art Institute of America, which was, I believe, vacated in 2019. And there were a handful of small tenants that were in the middle building that were essentially either had vacated or were on their way to vacating. And of course, the sidewalk, the streetscape that people passed every day, many people pass every day, represented not just physical barriers and visual barriers, but also an unwelcoming streetscape on, I think, one of the most high-profile stretches of Market Street in Philadelphia as you enter the center city from 30th Street and 30th Street Station. And so our charge was to revitalize this, to bring the sense of history back, and also to make this a welcoming, inviting stretch of street. And so that first question that we posed, that first theme, was to not just realize commercial potential, but also to do so in a contextually sensitive way, and that we felt achieved a civic end. So when we began the project, when Kieran Timberlake began working on this project with Breakthrough, we approached the project as we do all of our projects, with a very, very thorough investigative analysis of, observing, analyzing, and synthesizing information, both at the municipal level with things such as sky plane restrictions and FAR requirements, fire separation in a dense urban environment, Environmental factors, working with our research group here at KT, incident solar radiation, as well as usable daylight opportunities within the building, opportunities to bring energy usage down through a facade that was able to manage and mitigate daylight. And then experiential, the things that people who are using the building are going to look for, the things that people walking by and observing the building. Views in particular were really important to our client. Views out of the building, connection to the city, and really positioning this building in Philadelphia. So, in the course of our initial investigations into how we were going to mass this building, how we were going to approach it, if you start with the existing buildings and the decision early on to retain 2300 Market and then to reconstruct the facade of 2314 Market, we could have approached this as a full build out, pushing the building out to the lot lines and sort of subsuming and incorporating those two facades, those two buildings, but that didn't feel appropriate. We actually wanted to create a separation, a true separation. We called it a gasket between the historic buildings and the new overbuild, not just to make that as an architectural element, a small reveal, but to actually have it be a full floor reveal that could be occupied by people, to create terrace space there and an elevated landscape, and to really put into dialogue the buildings that have been there for over 100 years with the new building that will be inserted into and around those. Then through a couple of, really, we felt restrained but impactful moves to actually create 3 inflection points on the building at the middle point of the building that would lighten its presence on the sidewalk and allow for more light and air down to the street, while also creating a facade that was dynamic and that actually was in sort of geometric conversation with the historic facade at 2300 Market. And then finally, through the design of the envelope, which Ryan will get into in a little bit, to accentuate the corners and to really promote those visual connections into and out of the building and views. And so you can see here that trio of buildings as we found it. That middle building, that terracotta facade had been painted over several times over the years, roofing mastic on it. It had been neglected, highly carbon stained terracotta from the early part of the 20th century. It's a building by the Philadelphia firm of Ballinger and Perot, now Ballinger. So not just a beautiful building, but a building with some local provenance as well. And then, of course, where we intend to leave this stretch of the sidewalk and this property when we're through in 2025. Stepping out, that full elevation on Market Street, and you see that inflection point, not just in the facade, but also at the roof line. And then just a photo from last week as the terracotta facade is reconstructed and the curtain wall is complete on the overbuild. Some more photos, just recent construction photos. These aren't official photos. These are just iPhone photos from last week. Looking down Market Street, you see how it sets in between 2400 Market and 2222 Market. The view looking south on 23rd Street, it captures the corner and the interplay of geometries between the pitch, the pediment of 2300 Market and then the inflection on 23rd Street. Looking to the west on Market Street during the daytime, a little bit of an overcast day, but still looking lovely. And then some of those great views that we've been able and fortunate enough to be able to create through this project. The view south, we're getting incredible views of the sort of urban cityscape towards the sports complex in South Philly. That inflection point serving a dual purpose, not just of lightening the building presence on the sidewalk, but also of creating opportunities for oblique views out of the building. This is at a terrace on the 5th floor, which will be behind the parapet of the middle terracotta building, looking towards City Hall. Views on every floor towards the corner, towards 30th Street Station and the Schuylkill River. And then a 3-sided terrace on the 4th floor that offers views to the south, east, west, and north. So, as we were saying earlier, retaining the sort of authentic sense of history and place here was important not just to us, but I think was really one of the visionary challenges that our client, Breakthrough Properties, um, gave to us, which they said, this is a developer who develops life science research facilities across the country, from California to New York, to Boston, as well as in Europe. But they came to us and they said, we don't want to just have a building that could be anywhere. We want a building that is unique to Philadelphia, that really feels authentically Philadelphia. And so we returned and said, okay, what is more authentically Philadelphia than this, right? This image that we were actually fortunate enough to receive from the Heritage Conservation Collective, who we worked with on some of the initial analysis of the facade for the Locomobile building in the middle there, shows what I think is a really beautiful representation of a previous moment in history when there was a real inflection point in technology. You have the sort of horse-drawn carriage in the foreground, and then in the background you have these two buildings, concrete and steel, for the Locomobile Corporation and the Autocar Corporation. And these were two early 20th century automobile makers that were not headquartered in Philadelphia. Autocar was headquartered in Ardmore, no longer, but had outposts in Philadelphia and built these buildings purpose-built for their vehicles. And just when we talk about these vehicles, I just want to give an impression of what we're talking about here. These are really just, I think, the intersection of technology and art. I mean, these are works of art. The two images to the right there are actually modern images of Locomobile model, I believe model 10s and model 11s that are highly collectible today. The image on the top is actually one that was at auction recently with a suggested sale price of around $500,000. And these were being stored, repaired, and shown in these buildings. Autocar no longer makes consumer vehicles, but still is in existence and is actually the longest continuously running auto badge in North America, I believe. They are now in Georgia and they make industrial vehicles like trash trucks and whatnot. And of course, the automobile industry in Philadelphia, I'm sure to many folks on this, you're not a stranger to the notion of Automobile Row in North Broad Street. And these two stately buildings, the Packard building on the left, Albert Kahn design, and of course the Studebaker building, two buildings that have been repurposed and given revitalized in the modern age, but which represented a concentration of these early automobile manufacturers on North Broad Street. And Autocar and Locomobile were no different. They actually had offices and showrooms on North Broad. They outgrew them and eventually moved over to this stretch of West Market, which was essentially an industrialized area in the early part of the 20th century. And they built these two buildings. I don't have the exact year. I believe 1910, 1911 is around the provenance of them. And of course, by the Great Depression, the automobile industry in Philadelphia had largely consolidated, and these satellite branch offices were no longer as feasible. And so these buildings went from their purpose-built function to essentially a series of sort of, I think, lesser purposes, lesser programs over the years. By 1930s, the middle building was simply a parking garage. The building at 2300 Market served many purposes over the years. And then, of course, when we began work on the project in 2020, this was the condition of 2300 Market, and the decision to retain this structure, to retain these floor sandwiches as program area for the building, added about 30 to 40,000 square feet of adaptive reuse to this project. And so, when we're thinking about the architectural cues and what to bring forward from the past from these projects, I think one thing that really appealed to us was this typology of these hardworking industrial buildings that typically primarily constructed of masonry, typically with a pronounced vertical and a suppressed horizontal element, and then with again, sort of efficient but impactful ornamentation, typically out of terracotta. You see this typology all over the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, right? And these are images. A couple of these are from just around the neighborhood that 2300 Market is in, and a couple more are from Northeast Philadelphia. And you see this typology everywhere. And I think the interesting thing about this to us that we wanted to carry forward was the relationship between space and structure and program. And in particular, the idea that these structural bays were oftentimes regulated by the types of manufacturing that was happening inside the buildings. And just to give a kind of compare and contrast here, the image on the right in one of those automobile storage buildings, the structural bay needed to accommodate the turning radius of a vehicle, or to have two vehicles that could move past each other. Similarly to what we're doing with life sciences research in the 21st century, there is a regulating order and a regulating dimension to that work, which is the spacing of a lab bench. And so we brought this forward, this idea that we would actually express through the facade the industry happening inside the building into our design for 2300 Market. I think another important part of that, as I was saying before, was this idea of texture and the idea of conveying what's happening inside the building through the architecture. This is at 2300 Market on the facade facing 23rd Street. I've walked by this so many times and never had noticed these beautiful winged wheel terracotta column caps on the center bay windows, and so bringing forward that idea. Oh, something happened. There we go. Bringing forward that idea of texture. And of course, texture in this neighborhood is incredible, from the sacred of, limestone, columns at the College of Physicians to the profane and a street manhole cover that you might see. But the idea of texture coming through in this building in a meaningful way was something that we wanted to explore, and which Ryan will explain a bit more in a moment. And then ultimately color. How can we actually have a building that feels at home in its neighborhood, but in a way that's not mimicking the context, but in a way that's complementing the context? And so, looking at older masonry buildings, terracotta, as well as some of the newer interventions, including the Pico building across the street, we started to extract a notion of color that we were able to develop into a color palette that we felt was warm, welcoming, contextual, and timeless, and which would extend not just to the exterior of the building, but to the interior of the building as well.
All right. Thanks, John. So I'm going to jump into a little more detail on the tectonics, materiality, construction of the building itself. And as John laid the groundwork for, we continually asked ourselves the question, how might we design an envelope system that cohesively responds to unique project conditions? So I'm going to get into more detail on that. So here's just a quick snapshot of the building. Again, just showing the different components of the building and our resulting envelope strategy, which endeavored to address and celebrate the specificity of the historic context, as well as a high-performing glass overbuild. And we were lucky that, obviously the site is just a couple of miles away from our office here in Northern Liberties. So we had the opportunity to run out to site throughout the project to kind of vet and validate all these material choices along the way. So eventually, taking into account all of those kind of analyses and studies we did early in the project, we were able to develop a curtain wall system for the overbuild that is essentially one system that addresses many conditions. Here you can see generally the breakdown of unitized curtain wall panel types that basically go from more transparent at the front of the building, as well as the designated office program zone, to more opaque along particularly 24th Street, which is really the lot adjacent to Aramark building at the west of our site, where we're closer to that building and have more rigorous fire separation requirements, and so more opacity there. And as John mentioned as well, this just illustrates that translation of the 11-foot lab module into our 3-foot structural bay. This also demonstrates kind of the way we work and, looking into the future for this program that's sort of innovative and forward-looking, but also looking to the past and incorporating that timeless golden ratio. And then you can start to see that come to fruition here. This is a construction photo from a few months ago, looking south, where you can see that 11-foot module overlaid on our structural bay module to create the space inside the building. And additionally, taking into account this idea of kind of sculptural motif on the exterior of the building, historic precedents, both near and far, led us to this sculptural fluted metal panel geometry. It's actually an asymmetrical concave flute, as we've called it, which provides some dimension and shadow and subtly, excuse me, subtly enhances the hierarchy of those dominant verticals that John mentioned earlier as well. And there you can see that was that first panel we saw on site. It's laid on its side, obviously, but seeing that fluted vertical metal panel, ready to get loaded up into the building. And then again, just a little more detail on that curtain wall overbuild system. We had 3 fundamental unit types here. They're deployed across the building. The standard unit includes a 3-foot wide extruded asymmetrical flute and a larger 5-foot glazing panel, and then a smaller 3-foot wide glazing panel, which all come together to create that 11-foot module. Throughout the process, we of course rigorously kind of vetted and tested out this curtain wall system. So we had a series of mock-ups, a full-scale visual mock-up out at Reflections, who's the curtain wall fabricator, their warehouse up in the Northeast Philly. This allowed us to confirm all those material decisions we were making earlier in the design process and ensure that the final product was as expected, and also went through a rigorous set of performance mock-up testing protocols out at York at Intertech. And then again, a more recent photo seeing all of that installed on the building. And again, this is looking up at 23rd Street, where you see that kind of inflection of the existing pediment and the inflection of the curtain wall overbuild and the kind of emphasized striation, vertical striation and suppressed horizontal in both the new and the existing building. And then that leads into a little more detail on the existing buildings themselves. So just a quick summary here, John touched on some of this, but basically, you can see the middle as we inherited the 2300 building, and our work here involved some restoration of the masonry where required. We returned the windowsills at grade down to the floor level to better connect with the streetscape and create that dialogue between exterior and interior. Installed all new windows in the spirit of the originals, and are introducing a new sidewalk and streetscape, including as many street trees as we could with the many utility challenges we had below grade. So, and then similarly at the middle building, the terracotta building, just to make sure it was clear here, the structure and interior of that building was demolished, but we were able to salvage a big portion of the terracotta facade blocks. So we are restoring and reconstructing that facade, installing new windows in the spirit of those originals, and this building will serve as the primary entry of the overall new 2300 building complex. So creating a kind of emphasized entry portal with a cantilevered canopy marquee at the entryway. All right, so how might we utilize restoration, reconstruction, and new construction to promote positive civic and urban impact? So here we're going to dive a little more deeply into this process of restoration and reconstruction. So I just wanted to also note that in the case of 2300 Market, there was no requirement to retain any of the existing buildings on this site. So the client came to us with a goal in mind to reuse and incorporate that brick building into the site, and had a question about how we might do that with the terracotta building as well. So this was a civic choice. We collaborated with the city, neighborhood groups, CCRA, and interfaced with the Preservation Alliance to develop this overall retention strategy. This was a design choice. We worked hard to demonstrate to the owner and all the stakeholders how this would simply make for a better building. And it was a value proposition. We were able to optimize project resources and schedule with a hybrid approach, which I'll explain in a little more detail, but basically salvaging the most visible and highly ornamental portions of the facade and recreating the more repeated, simpler geometry with GFRC. Again, this was a highly collaborative endeavor here. So this is just a snapshot kind of zooming in on the actual terracotta restoration and reconstruction process. So lots of coordination with our own internal consultants, Ascent, who advised on the restoration, our structural engineer, Maxal, and then RWDI, who's been advising on the envelope and restoration for the entirety of the project. And then working closely with our collaborators at Hunter Roberts and their subcontractors, in particular, Phoenix, who was the mason, ARC, who created the GFRC through Phoenix, and then Owen Steel and Reflection Window Wall, who contributed for structural steel and curtain wall, respectively. And all of this, of course, required a lot of kind of planning and effort along the way to make sure that we were able to achieve these goals of restoration and reconstruction. So as you can see here, a kind of parallel process overlaying all of the efforts during design to evaluate the existing buildings, incorporate them into our design, as well as have these ongoing conversations with city and neighborhood groups to make sure we were addressing their concerns and requests to the best of our ability with our design. This also required a really rigorous and in-depth process for the terracotta salvage and reconstruction itself. That's the bottom line there, and we're going to go into a little more detail on that as well. All right, so you saw the pictures John showed of the terracotta building when we found it. So as I mentioned, this required a kind of stripping of the building of those terracotta pieces. So the mason Phoenix worked really carefully to remove the portions of that terracotta that would be salvaged, which is basically everything from the ground to level 2, and then all of the highly ornamental pieces at the top of the building. You can see a little more detail here, kind of scale of those actual pieces, and what it kind of logistically took to get all these pieces safely down back to the ground, for eventual reinstallation. This you can see here, just seeing the scale of things like the keystone and the dentils, which were all taken down piece by piece and eventually ID'd and organized, stored back in back in Phoenix's yard in Chester. So here you can see all those pallets of all the pieces safely packaged up and then ready for evaluation and cleaning. So we started to unpack all of these pallets to see what we were really dealing with here. So here's some kind of detailed photos of what we found. These are the pieces, as John mentioned, many layers of paint on top of them and carbon staining below that we had to reckon with. Our goal here was to be able to restore the terracotta to its original finish without having to apply a new opaque coating onto all these pieces. And it's something that we were optimistic, but weren't certain about until we really went through this evaluation and testing process. So we went through a number of kind of cleaning mock-ups, which you'll see in a second. Sorry, I was going to mention here, it was just really cool, again, to see the inside of those pieces, the kind of finger marks on the inside, really understanding kind of labor and kind of human touch that went into all these, and reinforced our decision to try to save as much of it as possible. And then jumping to the cleaning process. So Phoenix worked diligently to strip all of these pieces of their paint. On the left, you can see really the severity of that carbon staining that we mentioned. So that led to another series of tests to figure out the best, most effective way to get that staining cleaned off. So we did some testing in our office. Phoenix also did a fair amount of experimentation and testing in their yard. Comproco came to our office actually to help us do this piece, and this is where we really started to feel more sure that we could really get to this the finish line here and restore the terracotta to its original finish. John mentioned our work with the heritage conservation consultants. This is just a snapshot of some of the original window frames that were uncovered under the metal enclosures of the brick building. And we did undergo some paint analysis just to get a sense of kind of the history of those windows and the kind of color story. Ended up with, I think, yeah, like over 10 layers of paint on those, a number of which you can see, I guess the last of which you can see is that kind of reddish rust color. So just an interesting tangent of our overall analysis of the historic buildings. And so once we were fairly confident about the ability to get these pieces cleaned, we started an additional mock-up process, to confirm again the kind of level of expectation for all of the pieces of terracotta and what level of cleanliness and lack of staining we were expecting, but also to inform the coloration of the reconstructed GFRC blocks. So on the right-hand picture, you can see there's a kind of square sample at the bottom of the mock-up. That's a piece of GFRC. The fabricator did some photographic scanning of the original pieces to inform the color selections for those GFRC pieces, and eventually created a bunch of samples for us to review and select from. And ultimately, we landed on 3 very subtly different shades of the kind of beige gray that would then be randomly applied to those recreated GFRC piers to bring in a little bit of variation and some of that character of the original terracotta material to hopefully kind of bridge the gap between old and new and not have such a striking difference in materiality. And then did an additional mock-up. This is of the upper cornice, some of the most kind of highly ornamented and heavy pieces of terracotta. I know at least some of the pieces were nearing 400 pounds. So also a kind of constructability and structural challenge in that regard. So on the right-hand picture, you can see starting to test, excuse me, some of the attachment details and validate all of that. And then this all made its way back into our drawings. We were able to put a lot more kind of certainty and precision into our details once these pieces were, measured and evaluated when they were off the building. And this is an elevation just showing, again, that kind of division between the salvaged terracotta in gray and the recreated GFRC in the speckled white. Just zooming in on those details, a photo of the cornice mock-up and the detail elevation of that cornice, and the section, again, kind of illustrating the kind of structural complexity there, working with our structural engineer and Ascent to work through those details, make sure that these pieces will go back up and stay for a very long time once they're back up there. This also worked into the shop drawing process with the subcontractors as a plan and section, or sorry, our plan detail and the plan detail from the shop drawings of the GFRC. And again, those terracotta GFRC color sample panels on the right, and how that then gets distributed onto the elevation of the building. And that brings us almost to today. This is a progress photo from a couple of months ago where you can see kind of the heat of construction and coordination. Here, the curtain walls going up, the backup framing for the terracotta and GFRC is getting installed. You can start to see the framing of those arched windows at the top of the terracotta building and the historic windows going into the brick building. Another photo from a couple weeks ago where the remaining salvaged terracotta pieces at the top of the building are getting staged for installation within the building. And just breaking a few days ago at this point, almost the entirety of those vertical piers have been installed with the reconstructed GFRC. Almost the entirety of that salvaged first floor is installed, and just really gratifying, of course, to start to see that detail and character come back to the site, zooming in on that kind of cornice piece or first level cornice piece with the we call it the grapes at the top of level 1. You can also see the kind of the gasket that John talked about here again, in the original renderings, really creating some deference to the historic buildings and connecting the new to the old in what we hope is a sensitive and pleasing way. So this brings us almost back to today, just a reminder of where we found the site. As John described, a kind of unwelcoming, inaccessible site to something that's aspirational, extending the kind of welcoming and civic aspiration for the building out into the street, creating a kind of soft, inviting edge and a buffer, between the pedestrians and Market Street, and that will lead you into what will be a public lobby. That's going to have a cafe, so hopefully you all can stop by in a few months, if not sooner, to grab a cup of coffee and take it all in. So, thank you. Anything else, John? Well, before we open it up?
No, that's all. I will add, we are pursuing and we'll achieve LEED Gold on this project as well. FAR bonuses do work. So really proud to be able to say that as well.
Well, thank you guys so much. We had a few questions here in the chat, and for anybody who is curious about anything else, either pop it in the chat or you can just raise your hand. But so the first question actually came from our very own George. George, I don't know if you wanted to run through it yourself or if you want me to read it, but he was curious about the if you had, here he is.
I think it's probably not something you found, but I was just wondering if you ran into Elizabeth Fleischer in connection with the Autocar building, because Roth and Fleischer worked for many years with Autocar, but I think their engagement started later than 1913. Just curious.
Yeah, my understanding was that the Autocar was headquartered in Ardmore. We did not run into Elizabeth Fleischer. I would love to learn more about the facility out in Ardmore, or maybe it was in Narberth, as your note says. My understanding is that the building at 2300 Market was not their headquarters building. Their headquarters were in Ardmore, I believe, from their founding. I don't know when. I believe it was the 1950s they moved to Georgia. But that this was essentially it was both a storage facility, a repair facility, and a showroom, and also offices in Center City. But so I think these were both simultaneous, and then once they vacated the Center City building, they were still in Ardmore for, I believe, a couple of decades.
Cool. And so the next question we had was about whether this original building was listed on the National Register or not, and if you took advantage of any tax credits or anything like that.
The short answer is no, they were not listed. So there were no specific tax benefits that were realized as part of retaining, the corner building and the facade of the terracotta building. I think this relates a little bit actually to another question further down, which is about persuading the client to retain the historic structures, and did they push back? I think they were always interested in, I think John mentioned this too, in creating a building that was, authentic to the city and the neighborhood and the site. And we're always assuming that the building at the corner would be incorporated if it could be. That was something I believe John came to the project with, and something we totally endorsed and supported.
Yes.
The retention of the facade of the middle building was more of a conversation, I would say. It was something we worked to work through together to demonstrate that it was a benefit to their building and to the site, and something that was achievable within the kind of schedule and budget and constructability of the project. So eventually we got to a point where, everyone was, of a consensus that it was worth doing and we could make it happen. And I think having the kind of dialogue with both CCRA and Preservation Alliance helped kind of helped in our pursuit of that retention.
I was curious if while you were looking into the history of the building, whether it was like the narrative history or when you were doing material testing, if there was any like impactful discovery that you made that kind of helped to guide the design.
Yeah, I can start that, and then Ryan, if you want to jump in as well, I'm sure you have some stories too. I think a site like this is like you could just get lost in the urban archaeology. Um, these buildings were extant before the modern Market Street Bridge across the Schuylkill. So there was a whole kind of buried history below these buildings that really lent itself to just wanting to just get into not just the sort of programmatic history and who happened to commission the buildings originally, but also the relationship of these buildings to the city and to the evolution of the city. I think the transformation of this stretch of Market Street, as has happened with a lot of Market Street, from these kinds of rows of buildings that have a more sidewalk facing presence to much larger buildings, much larger, more block scaled buildings. I mean, for us, that was we really recognized immediately, and I believe our client did as well, the opportunity here to retain that streetscape and to do so in a way that did not in any way hinder their ability to create this kind of state-of-the-art, world-class life sciences research facility. There was no compromise that needed to be made here. And I will say as well, the other interesting thing that was discovered by, very early on in the enabling process was that the structural bay of 2300 Market was almost exactly 33 feet, which works perfectly with an 11-foot lab bay. So there was a kind of symbiotic relationship between old and new as well. And what that means is it meant that we were able to do an overbuild, a true overbuild, without having the structure for the overbuild completely destroy all interior opportunities in the historic building that was being retained. We were able to actually just bolster that structure and still have incredibly useful interior space for offices and labs. I'll say the one thing that we don't, and this maybe gets in a little bit to Kevin's question as well. The one thing we didn't really get into in this presentation was the interior planning. The interior planning, this is a center core building, and the interior planning is to essentially bias office space to the north along Market Street and the lab space to the south. And so once we had that framework in place, it basically created a systemization of systems in the building and mechanical systems in the building, such that the core was able to serve that. And just to elaborate a little bit on Kevin's question, which I'll go ahead and read, Nika, if you don't mind, which I think is a great question. The potential of civic buildings and laboratory buildings, and just talking about the number of laboratory buildings that are being built in the city. I think we felt that our responsibility here, I mean, given this site and given what was there, was first, obviously to meet what our client required from the project, but also we had this unique opportunity. There were existing buildings there that presented this opportunity. Not every project is going to have that kind of opportunity, but we do think there is still that obligation to, especially in dense urban environments, places where people commute, places where people live, to create a real blurred edge between the city and the street level, and to do so in a way that, like I said, creates public space. Maybe these are spaces that people pass, but they're pleasant spaces. Maybe it's adding landscape, which creates additional shade, which obviously creates microclimatic impact. And then, of course, maybe it's a public lobby, a lobby that anyone can go in and buy a cup of coffee and sit down and read the paper in. Our client envisions this lobby as a potentially a place that will hold events. You could imagine, community board meetings or other civic events happening in this lobby. And I think that is a really important aspect that's not just architectural. It also extends to ownership and to, I think, the obligation we have as citizens and stewards of the city.
Great. So I think next up, we have a question from Robert, and maybe you don't know this, but he's curious if the surface parking lot across the street, if there's any plans for development on that, or on the lot on the south side of the 2100 block.
Well, the surface lot that is catty corner to our project is a Pico owned lot, so it will really be. I don't know anything about that. I would love to see something happen there, and if anyone wants to do that, please don't hesitate to give us a call. We're happy to work on it. Obviously the development of 2222 Market was very positive in that it turned another surface parking lot into a building with a pronounced undercroft that allows for some additional circulation, and obviously that building is even larger than our building, and those are people coming to the city every day, or people walking to work, and revitalizing and densifying our sidewalks, and which helps businesses and just helps with every aspect of city life. So I think those are positive developments, and I'm happy to see it. I think the surface parking lot across the street there, I think this is not the first time I've been asked that question or we've talked about it. So I would love to see something happen someday.
Very cool. David Brownlee had a couple questions here. I think that he's on. Do you want to speak up on those questions, David?
Sure. I'm just wondering, I think the fluting, I have to confess, I had not noticed the fluting until you called attention to it. Did you wish you made it a little deeper? And the other question was just a general one. It seems you could probably identify many buildings built in the last 20 years by the way that the massing of large forms is defined by very subtle shifts in diagonal geometry, large forms coming together that are misaligned intentionally to a little bit. And obviously this is in part of an effort to break up the, I guess you could say, the monotonous rectangularity of modernism. You've done a number of buildings that do that too, and I just wonder, you know, as a firm that is in fact defining the style of our times, give us some insight into how that style of our times has been conceived. So the first question was just a little one about the detail of the fluting, and the second is a bigger one about what is driving you to make our architecture look the way it does.
It's great questions. Ryan, do you want to take the first one and I can take
Yeah,
the
I can
second one?
start. Sure,
Yeah.
sure. That sounds good. I think for the fluting, Dave, I mean, for the whole process, there's been a little bit of push and pull of the subtlety of the geometry, the combination of both the inflection point, which goes to your second question, and the actual sculptural nature of that flute. The desire was always that it was fairly subtle, and there was also a push and pull along the project of just constructability and the fabrication constraints, working with you know, the subcontractor that's doing the facade and working within things like dimensions, budget, schedule, things like that. So where we landed was trying to hit the hit the nail on the head in terms of enough interest, but also enough subtlety to not overwhelm the kind of sereneness of the overall facade. So that was the goal. We always look back at our projects and think, what could we have done differently, or what will we do next time? So certainly something I'm sure we'll talk more about
I will
internally.
say just to that point, Ryan, when we were on site last week, Ryan snapped a photo that's very oblique coming up Market Street to the west. And I actually found the subtlety of the fluting. The flutes actually lean back at the top and the bottom. It actually creates a slight bulging effect that actually breaks the rectilinearity of it, the sort of like orthogonality of everything, the super gridded nature of curtain walls, for example, and actually brings a little bit of curvilinearity to the project in a way that was very economical. So in that sense, as Ryan said, we didn't intend for this to be gestural. We wanted it to be something that was third glance, something that you discovered, like that winged wheel at 2300 Market that you discover, and that once you see it, it just increases your appreciation as a reader of a building. To your second question, this is something we, on a project Ryan and I both worked on in New York, the Paulson Center at New York University, we encountered as well, which is, in an urban environment, when you're dealing with really intensive programmatic demands, you're starting with something that is essentially built out, that is a large block. And I think I can't speak for other architects, but in the case of those two buildings and this one as well, it really is experiential. It really is trying to position the users of the building, the users of the sidewalk, the users of the city in the position of the building, and trying to create efficient operations that bring more light to the street, that accentuate views to and from the building. And we're able to use analytical quantitative tools that we've developed here, through our research group to do that kind of qualitative analysis. And I think that breaking down the facade, whether it's through a kind of voxelization at NYU to start to break down this large massing, or it's through this kind of diagonality at 2300 Market, it really is about heightening the experience of being in and around the building, and also of just its presence in the streetscape. I think, you look at the buildings across the street, and they are they're a little bit more rectilinear. And so we wanted to do something that served as a counterpoint to that, but not in a way that was so exuberant that it became, superfluous, or became, silly. We wanted to do something that still felt restrained and handsome, and that would work within the context of Market Street. And I think the views, that approach on Market, obliquely and directly from 23rd Street, when you see the building start to appear from the side of the Pico building, and you see that inflection at 23rd Street, I think it's exciting. And so we wanted to contribute something to the city, our city. We wanted to contribute something to the city that was a counterpoint to some of that orthogonality, and created something exciting, but also pleasant to work in and pleasant to walk around.
Well,
Fabulous.
you've also made it easier for future architectural historians to date buildings to this period of time. This is this is the style of our time.
Yeah, it's a
Thank you
lot of
for
that
that.
is driven, a lot of that as well is driven by, as Ryan said before, the requirements of construction.
Yeah.
As which is still, no matter what we do, no matter how digital we get, construction is still messy and still handmade for the most part. So it's exciting.
Thank you.
Well, we are just about at time here. We had a handful of questions we didn't get to, so sorry about that, folks. But fantastic presentation, John and Ryan. Thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure.
Our
And we
pleasure.
we can't wait to
Thank you.
see this building get finished up.
Thanks, everyone. And
Us
thank you for
too.
the wonderful
Thanks.
questions. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, well, have a fantastic day, everybody. Our next event will be with a one-on-one with Jesse Lawrence, and that is in person on February 11th in the evening. So we hope we see you there. Thank you so much, everybody.